The descent did not feel like falling. It felt like being chewed on by a giant metal beast that had decided to spit him out. Theo Hart had spent 20 years writing survival guides for deep space mining corporations. He knew the theoretical terminal velocity of a Class 4 reusable pod. He knew the exact decibel level at which the atmospheric shielding began to rattle, 120 decibels, loud enough to rattle teeth loose from the gums. He knew that the survival rate of a blind drop onto an unmapped Deathworld was approximately 3%. Knowing the statistics did not make the reality any less nauseating. Inside the cramped, stale air of the cockpit, Theo gripped the restraint harness until his knuckles turned white. He was not a soldier. He was a salvage engineer, a man who fixed broken airlocks and wrote sarcastic manuals on how not to freeze to death in a vacuum. He was not supposed to be here. The retro thrusters fired with a violence that slammed his spine against the seat. Then came the impact. It was not a thud. It was a series of grinding, tearing screeches as the pod plowed through something dense, forest canopy perhaps, or rock formations before coming to a shuddering halt. Silence rushed in, ringing in his ears. The gravity stabilizers groaned and died. Theo unbuckled his harness, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He reached for the manual release lever. According to the manual, which he had written, the door should blow outward, creating a ramp. He pulled the lever. The explosive bolts fired. The door blew open. But instead of falling down to form a ramp, the heavy slab of plasteel swung violently upward and stayed there. Theo stared at it for a second, his brain trying to recalibrate. The pod had not landed upright. It had rolled. He was currently upside down, and the floor was the ceiling. Perfect, Theo wheezed. Gravity, my old nemesis. He released the secondary latch on his seat. Gravity, finally deciding to obey the laws of physics, took over. Theo tumbled out of the seat, falling past the control console, and landed hard on the curved inner hull of the pod's roof, which was now the floor. He groaned, feeling a bruise forming on his shoulder, and scrambled toward the open door. He did not walk out. He slid out, tumbling like a bag of laundry dumped from a dryer, and hit the ground with a graceless thud. The air smelled of ozone-wet iron and something rotting. It was thick and humid, clinging to his skin instantly. Theo rolled onto his back, gasping for breath, trying to stare up at the sky to see where he was. He could not see the sky. He saw fur. He saw muscle. He saw a set of claws the length of combat knives resting gently, terrifyingly on the center of his chest. Theo froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Above him stood a creature that looked like a nightmare woven from wolf anatomy and humanoid grace. She was massive, crouched low, her body covered in sleek, dark fur that seemed to absorb the dim light. Her ears, long and tufted, twitched independently, swiveling like radar dishes. But it was her face that held him predatory, undeniably dangerous, yet possessing an intelligence that no animal should have. She was not attacking. She was leaning down, her ear pressed almost against his sternum. She was listening to his heart. Theo lay perfectly still. He could feel the weight of her paw on his chest, heavy enough to crush his ribcage if she applied even a fraction more pressure. He could hear her breathing, a low, rhythmic huffing sound. His survival instinct, the one that had kept him alive through 3 reactor meltdowns and a pirate raid, told him to reach for the pry bar on his belt. His logical brain told him that he would be disemboweled before his hand moved 2 inches. The creature lifted her head. Her eyes were gold slit-pupilled and intense. She stared at him, then let out a low growl that vibrated through his bones. Theo swallowed dryly. He forced his voice to work, keeping it low and flat. "If you plan to kill me," Theo whispered, "please schedule it for later. I am currently behind on my sleep." The creature did not understand the words. He saw the confusion flick across her golden eyes, but she seemed to understand the tone, the lack of aggression, the exhausted resignation. The growl faded into a sharp exhale. She stepped back, removing the weight from his chest. Theo sat up, slowly keeping his hands visible. That was when he saw it. A jagged shard of metal, likely debris from his pod's crash, was embedded deep in her flank. Around the wound, the flesh was not just bleeding. It was pulsing with a sickly, silver network of veins. The local flora. Parasitic metal. He had read about this in the encrypted files he had stolen before being dumped. The metal on Meyerhaven was not dead. It was hungry. The creature Tala winced as she shifted her weight. She hissed, snapping her teeth at the wound, but she could not reach it properly. Theo looked at the wound, then at the forest around them. The trees were twisted spires of black wood and rusted iron, their leaves sharp as razors. If he ran now, he might make it 500 yards before something else ate him. If he stayed, the wolf woman might eat him. But Theo Hart had a fatal flaw. He could not walk away from something that was broken. "Hey," he said softly. Tala snapped her head toward him, lips peeling back to reveal white fangs. Theo raised his hands, palms out. He pointed to his own side, then to hers. He mimed pulling something out. "It is going to kill you," he said. "The infection rate of galvanic parasites is 100% if untreated. You have maybe 2 hours before that turns necrotic." Tala watched him. She was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. But she did not lunge. She was assessing him, listening to the rhythm of his voice, the beat of his heart. She sensed fear, yes, but not malice. Theo reached for the emergency kit strapped to his thigh. He moved in slow motion. He unzipped the pouch and pulled out a pair of sterilized forceps and a canister of biosealant. "I am coming closer," Theo narrated his actions, keeping his voice a low drone. "I am going to hurt you. Then I am going to fix you. Please do not bite my face off. It is the only face I have." He scooted forward on his knees. Tala growled a rumble that sounded like grinding stones, but she held her ground. She was desperate. She knew the metal was eating her. Theo reached out. His hand trembled slightly. He took a breath, held it, and forced his hands to steady. Shift gears. He was not a victim anymore. He was an engineer. The problem was a foreign object. The solution was extraction. "On 3, Theo muttered. 1, 2. He clamped the forceps onto the metal shard and yanked. Tala roared. It was a sound of pure fury and pain that scattered the birds in the iron trees above. Her claws slashed out instinctively, tearing a furrow in the dirt inches from Theo's knee. Theo did not flinch. He dropped the bloody shard, grabbed the biosealant spray, and coated the wound before the blood could attract predators. The foam sizzled as it hit the raw flesh, killing the silver parasites instantly. "Done!" Theo gasped, falling back onto his heels. "It is done!" Tala panted heavily, her chest heaving. She looked at her side. The pain was gone, replaced by the cool numbness of the sealant. She looked back at Theo. The golden eyes narrowed. She did not thank him. She did not nuzzle him. She looked at him with a new kind of suspicion. Prey ran. Predators fought. What was this soft skin bag of a creature that caused pain to stop pain, before either of them could move a sound cut through the humid air? It was not an animal call. It was the crackle of static, followed by a voice that seemed to descend from the clouds. "Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Theo looked up. A drone, sleek and silver, hovered 50 feet above the canopy. It projected a hologram of a man's face, handsome, groomed with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Meyerhaven," the voice said. It was smooth like velvet wrapped around a straight razor. "I am Warden Halden. If you are hearing this, congratulations. You survived the drop. That puts you in the top 40% already." Theo stood up, dusting the dirt from his jumpsuit. He recognized the face. Halden, the man who ran the illegal betting rings on the outer rim. The man who had thrown Theo out of the airlock because Theo had refused to falsify a safety report. "I see you found a friend, Theo," Halden's voice purred from the drone. Or perhaps a meal. It is hard to tell with the locals. Tala snarled at the hologram, her hackles rising. Here are the rules, Halden continued, his tone shifting to that of a game show host explaining a bonus round. Simple rules, easy to remember. To leave Meyerhaven, you must reach the Echo Spire. The drone projected a beam of light, pointing toward a distant mountain range. At the peak, piercing the swirling gray clouds, stood a massive structure. It looked like a tuning fork, made of obsidian, humming, with a faint violet energy. The Echotide is coming, Halden said. A tidal wave of reality distortion. When it hits its peak, the spire opens. You have 3 days, maybe 4 if the atmospheric pressure holds. Theo stared at the spire. It was miles away, through jungle that wanted to eat him. Oh, and one small detail, Halden added. The spire is old technology, pre-Federation. It does not respond to passcodes or keycards. It responds to bioharmony. It requires a synchronized resonance. In layman's terms, Theo, you cannot enter alone. The door listens for a chorus, not a solo. Knee. The hologram flickered. Find a partner, sync up, or get wiped from existence when the tide rolls in. Good luck. The betting odds are currently 7-1 against you. The drone zipped away, vanishing into the gray mist. Theo stood in silence for a long moment. He looked at the spire. He looked at the dense, metal-infused jungle. Then he looked at Tala, who was licking the sealant on her flank. Bioharmony, Theo muttered. Great. I have to harmonize with a wolf who thinks I am a chew toy. He looked down at his helmet, which lay cracked on the ground. He picked it up. The visor was shattered, but he had a marker in his pocket. He always carried a marker. You never knew when you needed to label a hazard. He sat down on a mossy rock. He needed to organize his thoughts. Panic was death. Structure was life. He uncapped the marker and wrote on the jagged glass of the visor. Top 10 ways not to die in the first day. 1. Do not bleed. Everything here smells blood. 2. Do not annoy the local wildlife, especially the ones with claws longer than your fingers. He looked at Tala. She was watching him, right her, head tilted. Do not worry, Theo said to her. You are not on the list yet. Night on Meyerhaven did not fall. It collapsed. One moment the sky was a bruised purple. The next it was absolute suffocating black. And with the darkness came the cold. It was a sharp, biting freeze that seemed to radiate from the ground itself. And with the cold came the hunters. Theo could hear them before he saw them. Metallic clicking sounds. The whir of biological gears. The creatures of Meyerhaven were not just flesh and blood. They were integrated with the planet's heavy metal crust. They hunted by thermal signature. Theo shivered, wrapping his thin flight suit tighter around himself. He was sitting with his back against a stone wall, his teeth beginning to chatter. Tala appeared from the shadows. She nudged him hard with her snout, nearly knocking him over. Hey, Theo whispered. Personal space. She snarled softly and grabbed the sleeve of his suit with her teeth, tugging him. She was insistent. She pulled him toward a narrow crevice in the rock face, hidden behind a curtain of hanging wire-like vines. Theo understood. Hide. Good idea. They squeezed into the small cave. It was cramped, barely big enough for the two of them. The walls were lined with a glowing bioluminescent moss that gave off a faint heat. It was a natural thermal mask. Tala curled up near the entrance, her body blocking the wind. Theo huddled in the back. But as the silence of the cave settled, Theo noticed something wrong. Tala was shaking. It was not from the cold. Her muscles were spasming in rhythmic jolts. Her ears were flattened against her skull, and she was pawing at her head, as if trying to remove an invisible helmet. She let out a high keening whine that sounded like a radio struggling to find a frequency. The echoes, Theo whispered. He realized what was happening. This species, Tala's species, they were audio-sensitive. They communicated through resonance. But Meyerhaven was a deathworld of magnetic storms and grinding tectonic plates. To her, this world was not just loud. It was screaming. The night air was full of static that Theo could not hear, but it was driving her mad. She thrashed her claws, scraping sparks against the stone floor. She was losing control. If she panicked, she would run out into the dark, and the thermal hunters would strip her to the bone. "Hey," Theo said. "Hey, look at me." She did not hear him. Her eyes were rolled back, showing the whites. Theo moved closer. He knew this was dangerous. A panicked animal was lethal. But he could not watch her suffer. It reminded him too much of the colony collapse on Vega 4. The screaming, the chaos, the lack of anyone to take charge. He reached out and placed his hand firmly on the back of her neck, right between her shoulder blades. "Focus," Theo commanded. His voice was not loud, but it was deep, resonant. He used the tone he used when training rookies during a hull breach. "Breathe. Listen to my voice. Ignore the static." Tala snapped her teeth at him, but he did not pull away. "In," Theo said, taking an exaggerated breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. He held it. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4. He repeated the cycle. In. Hold. Out. He pressed his other hand against his own chest over his heart. Then he took her paw, risking his fingers, and placed her heavy, padded palm over his heart. Thump, thump, thump. His heart rate was slow, controlled. Years of deep space EVA work had taught him how to lower his metabolic rate to save oxygen. Tala froze. The chaotic noise in her head was still there, a hurricane of static. But beneath it she felt something rhythmic, something constant, a metronome in the chaos. Thump, thump. She leaned forward. She pressed her ear against his chest again, just like she had when he first landed. She closed her eyes. Her breathing hitched, then slowed. She began to match his rhythm. For an hour they sat like that in the glowing moss cave. A human engineer and an alien predator huddled together against the cold and the noise. Theo felt a strange sensation, not fear, but a heavy sense of responsibility. He had anchored her. Just as Tala's trembling stopped, the air outside the cave changed. It was subtle at first, a sweet chemical smell drifting in. Then came the sound, a high-pitched frequency that Theo could barely hear, like a dog whistle. Halden. The drone was back, somewhere high above. It was releasing a localized pheromone stimulant, a rage gas. It was a test. Halden wanted to see if the wild animal would tear the human apart if given a nudge. Tala's head snapped up. Her pupils dilated until her eyes were black pools. The chemical hit her system, overriding the calm Theo had built. Her lip curled. A deep, guttural growl erupted from her chest, louder than before. She looked at Theo, but she did not see the man who fixed her wound. She saw movement. She saw meat. She rose to a crouch, her muscles bunching to spring. Theo scrambled up, pressing his back against the cold stone wall. He had nowhere to go. The pry bar was on his belt, but he did not reach for it. If he fought her, he died. If he hurt her, he lost the only chance he had to reach the spire. Tala, Theo said. He named her then, a random name from an old Earth dialect meaning wolf. "I am not your enemy," she lunged. Theo did not strike back. He threw his arms out wide, exposing his chest. It was a suicide move. It was a gesture of absolute surrender. Tala's claws stopped 1 inch from his throat. The air pressure from her strike hit his skin. She stood there, trembling, fighting the chemical haze. Her instincts screamed at her to kill. The gas screamed at her to destroy. But the sound was still there. Thump, thump. She could hear his heart. It was hammering now, fast and hard, but it was the same heart that had anchored her. She looked at him. He was small. He was soft. He had no claws. He had refused to cut her with the metal bar at his hip. Why? In the brutal logic of Meyerhaven, kindness did not exist. Weakness existed. Strength existed. But this willful refusal to do violence, it was confusing. It was terrifying. A creature that could kill but chose not to was more dangerous than a beast that simply killed. Tala slowly lowered her hand. She shook her head violently, trying to clear the chemical fog. She backed away to the entrance of the cave, turning her back to him, putting her body between Theo and the darkness outside. She was guarding him. Theo slid down the wall, his legs turning to jelly. "Okay," he whispered. Top 10 list. Number 3. Do not play chicken with a chemically enraged super predator. He looked out past her shoulder through the curtain of vines. The clouds had parted briefly. Far in the distance, the echo spire stood against the starlight. And then Theo saw it. The spire pulsed. A soft violet light rippled up its obsidian surface. Thump. It pulsed again. Thump. It was faint, barely visible, but unmistakable. The giant alien structure was glowing in time with his own racing heart. Theo stared at it, the blood draining from his face. Halden had said the spire required a chorus. He said it required bioharmony. He said it was impossible for one person to trigger it. But the spire was answering him. It was listening to him. "Well," Theo whispered into the dark, "that is not ominous at all." He picked up the shard of glass and looked at his reflection. He looked tired. He looked terrified. But for the first time since the pod dropped, he did not look alone. Tala glanced back at him over her shoulder. Her golden eyes caught the reflection of the spire's light. She snorted a sound that might have been a laugh or a warning, and settled down to watch the night. The countdown to the echo tide had begun, and the spire was waiting. The second day on Meyer Haven began not with a sunrise, but with a gradual lightening of the gray sludge that passed for a sky. It also began with Theo Hart losing his favorite multi-tool to a plant. They were trekking through a dense ravine that cut toward the base of the echo spire. The vegetation here was not merely biological. It was a hybrid nightmare of cellulose and ferrous metal. The trees had bark that rusted, and the vines coiled like copper wiring. Theo had paused to adjust the strap of his boot when a vine thin and innocent-looking as a whipsnake lashed out. It did not strike him. It struck the magnetic locking mechanism on his belt. With a high-pitched whine of magnetic attraction, the vine ripped his high-grade titanium alloy multi-tool right off his hip. "Hey!" Theo shouted instinctively, grabbing for it. The vine retracted instantly, pulling the tool into a knot of writhing, thrumming vegetation high above. Theo watched as the plant seemed to chew on the metal sparks showering down as it dissolved the casing to get to the battery acid. "That cost 400 credits, Theo muttered, staring up at the canopy. "And it had a bottle opener." Tala, standing a few feet ahead, made a chuffing sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. She did not rely on technology. Her claws were bone, her fur was keratin, and her instincts were analog. She looked at Theo, then at his remaining gear, the scanner, the atmospheric recycler, the datapad. She pointed a claw at them, then made a sweeping gesture toward the forest. "Lose them or lose a limb," Theo sighed. She was right. The magnetic field in this ravine was intensifying. The plants were hungry for anything that carried a charge. "Fine," Theo grumbled. He began unbuckling his gear. He kept the basic medical kit, which was mostly plastic and gauze, and the manual pry bar. He hesitated over the datapad. It contained the start of his guide. It was his only link to sanity. He wrapped the datapad in a thick layer of rubberized insulation cloth he had scavenged from the pod seat, hoping it would mask the signature. He shoved it deep into his pocket. "Happy?" he asked Tala. She turned and began to walk her gait, loping and silent. Theo followed, feeling lighter, but infinitely more vulnerable. He was an engineer without tools. He was a writer without a pen. He was just meat in a jumpsuit. By mid-morning, the terrain shifted from jungle to a jagged field of slate and shale. The wind here howled through the rocks, creating a mournful whistling sound that set Theo's teeth on edge. Tala stopped suddenly. Her ears swiveled forward. She dropped low, her belly pressing against the dark stone. Theo froze. He had learned in 24 hours that when the 6-foot wolf woman stopped, you stopped. "What is it?" he whispered. She did not answer. She sniffed the air, then wrinkled her nose in disgust. A voice drifted from behind a pile of boulders. It was a human voice, raspy and dry. "I wouldn't step there if I were you, spaceman. Unless you want to be 3 inches shorter." Theo looked down. 2 inches from his left boot, a thin monofilament wire was stretched across the path. It was practically invisible against the gray rock. A figure emerged from the shadows of the boulders. He was humanoid, but life on Mire Haven had carved him into something jagged. He wore armor, made from scavenged plating bits of old pods, carapace from local beetles, and leather. One of his eyes was covered by a crude, handcrafted optical patch that zoomed in and out with a mechanical whir. He held a rivet gun that had been modified into a lethal-looking rifle. "Step back," the stranger said, slowly. Theo stepped back. Tala rose, a low growl building in her throat. The stranger shifted his aim to her, but he did not look afraid. He looked bored. "Easy, Duchess," the man said to Tala. "I am not looking to mount your head on a wall. Too much dusting." He looked back at Theo, his good eye narrowing. Then he squinted. "Wait a minute," the stranger said. He lowered the rifle slightly. "I know that face. I saw it on a datapad in a mining colony on Titan." Theo blinked. "I have a generic face. It is a defense mechanism." "No, no." The stranger stepped closer, ignoring Tala's warning snarl. "You are Hart. Theo Hart. The guy who wrote The Idiot's Guide to Vacuum Seals and 100 Ways to Die in 0G. Theo sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I prefer the title Structural Integrity Consultant." The stranger laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Brancade," he introduced himself, tapping his chest. "I used your guide on thermal regulation to survive a week in a cryo-storage locker. You are funny. Your chapter on cannibalism etiquette was hilarious." "It was not meant to be a joke," Theo said flatly. Brancade grinned, revealing teeth that were slightly too yellow. "What are you doing here, Hart? Did you come to write a review of Mire Haven?" Theo looked around at the desolate landscape, the carnivorous plants in the distance, and the storm clouds gathering above the spire. "Yes," Theo said. "I am giving it 1 star. The atmosphere is oppressive. The locals are bitey, and the customer service is actively trying to kill me." Bran threw his head back and laughed again. "Customer service, that is good. That is rich." He gestured with his rifle toward the north. "You mean Halden." The name made the air between them go cold. Tala hissed at the sound of it. "You know him?" Theo asked. "Everyone who survives longer than a week knows him," Bran said, his humor vanishing. He walked over to the trap wire and disarmed it with a practiced flick of his wrist. "Halden runs the show. He is not just a warden. He is a producer. He broadcasts the feeds. Rich folks in the core worlds pay millions to watch Survival of the Fittest. They bet on how long we last. They bet on how we die." Bran looked at Theo with a strange intensity. "There is a bounty on scripted deaths. If you die screaming while being eaten by a razor maw, the payout is 2 to 1. If you die of dehydration, 10 to 1. But if you survive, if you go off script." "What happens?" Theo asked. "Then Halden sends the cleaners," Bran said darkly. "Because hope is bad for ratings. And right now, Hart, you and your furry friend are trending. I hacked a feed an hour ago. Halden is selling your odds as the engineer and the beast. He is betting you do not make it past the lava fields." Theo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He looked at Tala. She was watching Bran with suspicion, but she seemed to understand the tone of threat. "We are going to the spire," Theo said. "Halden said the only way out is through the echo tide." Bran spat on the ground. "Halden says a lot of things. The spire is a myth, a meat grinder, but—" He looked at his own cobbled-together armor, then at the sky. "I have got nothing better to do. My family died in the last season. Halden made sure the shelters were locked. I figure if I am going to die, I might as well die messing up his finale." He shouldered his rifle. "I will walk with you. But if you slow me down, I leave you. I don't carry dead weight." "Charming," Theo said. "I can see why you are single." The group of two became a group of three. The dynamic shifted. Bran was loud, cynical, and moved with a chaotic energy that contrasted with Tala's silent grace and Theo's calculated caution. By early afternoon, they reached a cluster of fungal towers, giant mushrooms the size of houses, glowing with a faint blue bioluminescence. "Do not touch the blue ones," Bran warned. "They explode." Noted," Theo said, updating his mental list. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. It was human female and filled with a mixture of terror and outrage. Tala moved first. She launched herself forward, clearing a ridge of rock in a single bound. Theo and Bran scrambled after her. In a clearing between the fungal towers, a woman was backed against a wall of slime-covered stone. She was wearing the tattered remains of a white medical coat over a flight suit. In her hand, she held a jagged rock which she was swinging wildly at a swarm of flying creatures. They looked like jellyfish that had learned to fly, pulsating with neon light, their tendrils dripping caustic slime. "Back!" the woman shouted. "Back, you photosensitive vectors of disease!" "Glow ticks," Bran said, raising his rifle. "Nasty. They lay eggs in your pores." "Do not shoot," Theo yelled, pushing Bran's barrel down. "Those mushrooms are full of methane. One spark and we are all paste." Theo looked around. He needed a distraction. He needed chemistry. He reached into his medical kit and grabbed a handful of salt packets, basic rations from the pod. "Tala left flank," Theo shouted. Tala did not speak English, but she understood strategy. She roared and leaped to the left, drawing the swarm's attention. The glowticks turned, drawn by her heat and movement. Theo sprinted forward. He ripped open the salt packets and hurled the white crystals into the air, right into the center of the swarm. Biology on Meyerhaven was strange, but osmosis was universal. The salt hit the moist, slimy membranes of the flying creatures. Immediate dehydration shock. The glowticks shriveled, screeching, in a frequency that made Theo's teeth ache and dropped to the ground like stones. The woman slumped against the rock wall, dropping her stone. She was breathing hard, her face smeared with blue slime. She looked at the dead creatures, then at Theo. "Sodium chloride," she panted. "Desiccation agent, crude but effective." She stood up, straightening her ruined coat with immense dignity. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of weeks of insomnia. "Dr. Cleo Rook," she said, extending a hand that was covered in alien muck. "Xenobiology intern, currently displaced." Theo looked at the hand, then shook it. "Theo Hart, engineer. This is Tala, and the one with the gun is Bran." Cleo looked at Tala, her eyes widening, not with fear, but with scientific fascination. My God, the bone structure, the muscular density. She is magnificent. Tala blinked, unaccustomed to being called magnificent by a human. She sniffed. Cleo decided she smelled like disinfectant and fear, and sneezed. Cleo then looked at Theo's arm. In the scramble, a glow-tick tendril had grazed his forearm. It was a shallow burn, bubbling slightly. "You are injured," Cleo said sharply. She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She inspected the wound. "You call this first aid. You have dirt in the coagulation matrix." "Who taught you triage?" "A butcher. I fixed a wolf with glue and a prayer yesterday," Theo defended himself. I think I am doing fine. You are doing terrible, Cleo snapped. She pulled a small, pristine laser scalpel from a hidden pocket in her boot, likely the only thing she had saved. Sit. I will debride this. If you get gangrene, you will slow us down, and I refuse to die because of your necrosis. Bran leaned over to Theo. I like her. She has a terrible bedside manner. Cleo joined the group not because she trusted them, but because the logic of numbers was undeniable. She complained about the hygiene of Meyerhaven constantly. She scolded Bran for scratching his scars. She lectured Theo on his caloric intake. But she kept pace. As evening approached, the temperature plummeted again. They found shelter in a shallow cave system near the base of the foothills. The spire loomed closer, now a black needle piercing the storm clouds. They built a fire using dried fungal stalks. It burned with a sputtering green flame that offered little heat. The atmosphere in the cave was heavy. 4 strangers thrown together by gravity and cruelty. Tala was restless. She paced the perimeter of the cave, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. But she wasn't looking at the spire's peak. She was looking at the base, specifically at a deep, shadowed ravine that cut beneath the mountain. She stopped pacing and looked at Theo. She made a chuffing sound to get his attention. Theo looked up from his datapad. What is it? Tala crouched down. She used a claw to draw in the dirt floor. She drew a crude shape of the spire. Then, she drew stick figures, small ones trapped underneath it. She drew a circle around them. Then she pointed to herself, and then to the drawing. She looked at Theo, her golden eyes wide and pleading. She tapped her chest, then tapped the drawing of the small figures. Family? Theo asked softly. Tala shook her head. She made a gesture of height, low to the ground. Children. Not her biological children, perhaps, but her pack. Her responsibility. Bran leaned forward, squinting at the drawing. The runts, he muttered. I heard rumors. The last echo tide had hit early. A whole clan of locals got cut off near the gorge. The adults died fighting the metal parasites. The little ones must have retreated into the caverns under the spire. Cleo pushed her glasses up her nose. If they are trapped down there, the oxygen saturation must be critical. And without food, Tala let out a low whine. It was a sound of pure distilled heartbreak. She looked at Theo. She was telling him her condition. She would help him reach the door, but first she had to go down into the dark. Theo looked at the map he had been piecing together. The peak is that way, Theo pointed up. The ravine is that way, he pointed down. It is a detour, a significant one. Halden said we have 3 days. If we go down, we lose at least 12 hours. Maybe more. If we miss the window, Bran said, sharpening his knife, the spire locks, the tide hits, and we get turned into echo soup. I say we leave them. They are probably dead anyway. Tala snarled at Bran, a flash of teeth that made Bran flinch. I am just talking math, Bran defended himself. Survival is math. Theo looked at the fire. He thought about the top 10 list. He thought about the optimal choice. In his guides, the rule was always secure your own oxygen mask first. But he remembered Vega 4. He remembered the optimal choice he made, then sealing the bulkhead to save the ship, leaving 2 engineers on the wrong side. He remembered the silence of the comms. He looked at Tala. He remembered her paw on his chest anchoring him when the world screamed. We go down, Theo said. Bran dropped his knife. You are insane. You are actually insane. We will die. Then we die doing something decent, Theo said, standing up. I am tired of surviving by being the guy who locks the door. We go down, we get the kids, then we climb. Cleo looked at Theo, then gave a short, curt nod. Agreed. Pediatric rescue takes precedence over my desire to not be melted. Bran threw his hands up. Fine, but if I get eaten by a cave troll, I am haunting all of you. Suddenly, the air in the cave vibrated. The green fire flared and died, plunged them into darkness. A red light bathed the cave entrance. The drone was back. Halden's hologram flickered into existence, hovering just outside their shelter. He looked impeccable, holding a glass of amber liquid. "Touching," Halden said. "Truly. A debate on morality in a cave. The ratings are spiking, Theo." Theo stepped in front of Tala. "What do you want, Halden?" "To offer a lifeline," Halden smiled. "You are behind schedule. My analytics suggest that if you go into that ravine, your chance of reaching the peak in time drops to 0.4%. Halden took a sip of his drink. "So here is the deal. I have unlocked a service elevator on the North Ridge. It bypasses the cliff face. It takes you straight to the spire's entrance. You can be there in 2 hours. Safe, secure." Theo narrowed his eyes. "And the price?" "The elevator has a weight limit," Halden shrugged. 2 passengers. You and the wolf. She is the key, after all. The mechanic and the doctor, well, they are resourceful. I am sure they can find their own way." Bran went still. Cleo adjusted her glasses, her hand trembling slightly. Halden was doing exactly what he did best. He wasn't shooting them, he was dismantling them. He was offering Theo the optimal choice. Survival, guaranteed. All he had to do was leave the strays behind. It was the same choice as Vega 4. Theo looked at Halden. He felt the cold sweat on his back. He looked at Bran, who was gripping his rifle like a lifeline. He looked at Cleo, who was trying to look brave. He looked at Tala, who was watching him with an intensity that burned. She knew. She understood the offer. Theo walked toward the hologram. He walked until he was inches from Halden's flickering face. "Halden," Theo said. "Yes, Theo. Go to hell." Theo picked up a rock and hurled it through the drone. The machine sparked the hologram, distorting into a screech of static before crashing into the dirt. Silence returned to the cave. Bran let out a long breath. "You idiot. You magnificent idiot." "He will send the hunters now," Theo said, his voice shaking. "He does not like being told no." "Let them come," Tala growled. It was a deep, guttural sound, but the intent was clear. She moved to Theo's side and bumped her shoulder against his. It was a solid, heavy impact. "Thank you." Later that night, the fire was relit, but the mood was somber. They knew what was coming. The script had been broken. Theo sat apart from the group, trying to clean the dirt out of his datapad's charging port. Tala approached him. She moved silently, sitting down across from him. She reached into the pouch at her waist, a woven bag made of tough, dried fibers. She pulled out a cord. It was braided from 3 materials: the black vine of the iron trees, a strip of her own shed fur, and a bright silver wire she must have scavenged from a robot carcass. She held it out to Theo. Theo looked at it. "What is this, souvenir?" Tala took his wrist. Her pads were rough, calloused, but her touch was gentle. She tied the cord around his left wrist, knotting it, with a complexity that baffled his engineer's eyes. She patted the knot, then pointed to herself, then to him. "A debt cord," Bran said from the other side of the fire. He was feigning sleep, but watching. "In her culture it means she owes you a life. She cannot die until you are safe. It is heavy stuff, Hart. It is basically a marriage to your survival." Theo looked at the bracelet. It was crude, scratchy, and ugly. It was the most valuable thing he owned. He looked at Tala. She was waiting for a reaction. Theo forced a smile. "So, if I survive this, can I return it for store credit? I have been eyeing a new toaster." Tala did not understand the words, but she saw the smile. She snorted, rolling her eyes, a gesture she had definitely learned from him, and went back to sharpening her claws. The cave grew quiet. Theo turned on his datapad. The screen flickered battery low. He opened the file. Top 10 ways not to die in the first day. He deleted the title. He typed a new entry. Entry 11, how not to lose yourself when you are hungry. Step 1. Remember that optimal is a mathematical term, not a moral one. Step 2. If a man in a suit offers you a shortcut, throw a rock at him. Step 3. When the wolf gives you a bracelet, do not ask for a refund. Just say, "Thank you." He turned off the pad. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the ghost of Vega 4 did not come when he closed his eyes. Instead, he saw golden eyes watching him from the dark. The next morning, they found the entrance. It was not the main gate of the spire. That was still miles up the sheer cliff face. This was the entrance Tala had drawn the back door leading to the caverns where her pack was trapped. It was a fissure in the rock at the base of the mountain concealed behind a waterfall of toxic orange runoff. The door itself was a smooth obsidian slab, seamless and cold. There were no keypads, no handles, just a depression in the center shaped like a hand, but larger. "This is it," Tala signaled. She stepped forward. She was vibrating with anxiety. Her pack was behind this door. She placed her palm on the depression. She closed her eyes. She pushed with her mind, with her biology trying to resonate with the stone. Nothing happened. The stone remained cold, dead. It did not recognize her. Tala whined, pressing harder. She scratched at the stone. She slammed her shoulder against it. It was immovable. "It is locked," Cleo said, scanning it with her medical tricorder. "It is not reading her biosign. The frequency is phase-shifted. It is rejecting native DNA." Tala fell back, letting out a roar of frustration that echoed off the canyon walls. She had come all this way, defied the warden, trusted the alien, only to be locked out of her own home. Theo stepped forward. He looked at the smooth black stone. He remembered the pod drop. He remembered the light on the peak, pulsing in time with his heart. "Let me try," Theo said. "Do not be stupid," Brand said. "It is pre-Federation tech. It is built for them, not us." Theo ignored him. He walked up to the door. He could feel a hum coming from it, a low subsonic vibration that rattled his teeth. He took a deep breath. He didn't try to force it. He didn't try to conquer it. He just existed. He thought about the fear, He thought about the anger at Halden. He thought about the det cord on his wrist. He placed his hand on the depression. Thrum. The stone beneath his hand grew warm. A violet vein of light shot out from under his fingers, tracing a spiderweb pattern across the obsidian surface. Tala gasped. Brand dropped his rifle. The door didn't just unlock. It shuddered like a giant beast waking up. A deep, grinding sound of shifting gears echoed from deep within the mountain. The obsidian slab split down the middle and hissed open. Theo pulled his hand back, staring at his palm. It was tingling. "Okay," Theo whispered, his voice trembling. "That is new." He looked at Tala. She was staring at him with a mix of awe and terror. The door to her ancestors. The door that rejected her had just opened for a human mechanic. "Why?" Cleo whispered. "Why did it answer you?" "I do not know," Theo said, stepping into the dark corridor that revealed itself. "But I have a feeling Halden knows. And I have a feeling he is terrified of the answer." From the darkness of the tunnel, a pair of small, glowing eyes blinked open. Then another. Then another. The pack was alive. And Theo Hart had just unlocked their cage. The jagged landscape of the Diffraction Valley lived up to its name. The air here was filled with suspended microcrystals, remnants of some ancient geological shattering, which bent the weak sunlight into confusing hallucinogenic ribbons of color. To the naked eye, a rock 3 meters away might appear to be 10 meters to the left or floating upside down. For a group of exhausted fugitives being hunted by thermal-seeking machines, it was a nightmare. Theo Hart scrambled over a ridge of slate, his lungs burning. The air recycler on his belt was wheezing, clogged with dust. Behind him, the metallic chitter-click of Halden's hunters echoed off the canyon walls. These were not the slow, lumbering drones from the crash site. These were skulkers, quadrupedal mechs designed to flush prey out of tight spaces. Dr. Cleo Rook stumbled her boot, catching on a root of iron vine. She went down hard, the breath, leaving her in a sharp gasp. Brancade, who had been taking point with his modified rifle, stopped and looked back. He did not look concerned. He looked calculated. He glanced at the shimmering distortion where the hunters were closing in, then at Cleo, then at Theo. "She is done!" Bran shouted over the wind. "Her ankle is swollen to the size of a melon. We cannot carry her and outrun skulkers in a refraction field." Theo slid down the slope, grabbing Cleo's arm and hauling her up. "We are not leaving her." "Do the math, Hart," Bran yelled, firing a suppression shot into the prism fog behind them. "Velocity equals distance over time. She is 0 velocity. That makes us dead." "I failed math," Theo lied through his teeth, putting Cleo's arm over his shoulder. "Keep shooting, Bran." "I am serious." Bran's voice was sharp, cutting through the adrenaline. "Drop the dead weight. We split up. They will stop to process her. We get to the ridge." Theo froze. The words hit him harder than the physical exhaustion. Drop the dead weight. It was the same logic he had used on Vega 4. Secure the blast doors. Seal the compartment. Save the 60 to sacrifice the 2. It was the logic of survival manuals. It was the logic of Halden. Theo turned to Bran. His face was smeared with grease and alien dirt, but his eyes were cold. "Traveling light?" Theo said, his voice low and dangerous. "Usually means leaving people behind. I am done traveling light." Bran sneered, lowering his rifle. "Then you die heavy." He turned to leave, to abandon them to the approaching mechanical screeching. But a shadow moved. Tala stepped between Bran and the group. She did not growl. She did not bare her fangs. She stood at her full height, 7 feet of muscle and dark fur looming over the scavenger. She placed a hand on Bran's chest. It was not a shove. It was a wall. Bran looked up at her, his finger twitching on the trigger. "Move, Duchess. I am not playing." Tala looked him in the eye. For the first time since Theo had met her, she made a sound that was not animalistic. It was a guttural, grinding attempt at speech, forcing vocal cords designed for roaring to shape a human syllable. "Pack," Tala said. The word was rough, broken like stones grinding together, but it was undeniable. She pointed a claw at Cleo, then at Theo, then at herself. Then slowly, she pointed at Bran. "Pack," she repeated. "Stay." Bran stared at her. He looked at the hunters, closing in their red optical sensors, cutting through the fog. He looked at the massive wolf woman, who had just claimed him against all logic as one of her own. He swore loudly a string of profanities that spanned 3 star systems. "I hate this planet," Bran spat. He racked the slide of his rifle. "I hate all of you. Fine move. I will buy you 30 seconds. If you waste them, I am shooting you myself." He opened fire, the explosive rivets tearing through the mist, shattering the lead skulker. Theo did not waste the time. He hoisted Cleo up, ignored the screaming of his own muscles, and ran. They found the children an hour later, deep in the subterranean fissure that Tala had unlocked. The tunnels beneath the spire were not natural caves. They were smooth geometric corridors of obsidian humming, with the same dormant energy as the door. But the air was stale, recycled for too long. Tala smelled them before they saw them. She let out a soft whine and bolted ahead, rounding a corner into a small, circular chamber. When Theo caught up, the sight stopped him cold. Huddled in the center of the room, amidst a pile of scavenged nesting material, were 2 small figures. One was clearly of Tala's species, a young male perhaps equivalent to a human 10-year-old, his fur patchy and gray from malnutrition. This was Pax. Curled up against him was something else entirely. A small, pale creature with translucent skin and large bioluminescent eyes that blinked slowly in the gloom. Lumen. A different species, likely an offspring of one of the other contestants who had died in previous cycles. They were terrified. When Tala rushed in, Pax hissed, placing his small body between the giant wolf and the smaller child. He did not recognize her. It had been too long, and hunger had hollowed out his memory. Tala stopped devastated. She dropped to her knees, making soft chirping sounds, mother sounds. Pax held a sharpened piece of scrap metal, his hands shaking. "Easy," Theo whispered, stepping forward slowly. He kept his hands visible. Pax snapped the metal toward Theo. "I am not going to hurt you," Theo said. He looked at the two starving, frightened children. He looked at the dirt, the desperation, the absolute abandonment. He felt a wave of panic. He was an engineer. He fixed airlocks. He wrote manuals on how to drink recycled urine without vomiting. He did not know how to fix this. "I never signed a contract to be a father," Theo muttered to himself, rubbing the back of his neck. "I am barely qualified to own a cactus." Dr. Cleo Rook limp-walked past him, favoring her good leg. She knelt down, ignoring the weapon in the boy's hand. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a nutrient bar, one of the few they had left. "Then you signed the contract with Action, Mr. Hart," Cleo said sharply. She broke the bar in half and held it out. "Not with paperwork." Pax hesitated. The smell of the food hit him. He looked at Cleo, then at Tala, who was still making the soft chirping sounds. Slowly, the boy lowered the metal. He took the food, took a bite, and then immediately handed the rest to the smaller child, Lumen. That small gesture broke the tension. Tala moved forward, gathering them both into her arms. The reunion was silent, filled only with the sound of sniffing and the rustle of fur. But the relief was short-lived. Lumen began to cough, a dry hacking sound that rattled in a chest too small for this atmosphere. Panic flared in the child's large eyes. The bioluminescent skin began to pulse rapidly, a sign of extreme distress. "Hyperventilation," Cleo diagnosed, checking Lumen's pulse. "Heart rate is 200. The child is going into shock." "Do something," Bran said from the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "I need a sedative," Cleo snapped. "Which I do not have because someone—" She glared at the ceiling, implying Halden confiscated my medical bag. Theo stepped in. He knelt in front of Lumen. The child's eyes were wide, fixed on nothing, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Hey," Theo said. His voice dropped into that low, resonant register he had used on Tala. "Look at me," Lumen kept gasping. Theo took the child's small, cold hand and placed it on his own chest. "We are going to play a game," Theo said. "It is called The Machine Stops." He tapped his chest. Thump, thump. "I am the machine," Theo said. "You are the mechanic. The machine is running too fast. You have to slow it down. Count with me." Theo exaggerated his breathing. "In 2, 3, 4. He looked at Pax. "You two, help the mechanic." Pax mimicked Theo, taking a deep breath. "Out 2, 3, 4. Theo exhaled. Lumen stared at Theo's chest, feeling the slow, deliberate rhythm of his heart. The child's frantic gasps began to hitch, then lengthen. "In 2, 3, 4. It took 5 minutes. By the end, Lumen was breathing normally, the bioluminescence fading to a calm, soft blue. The child slumped forward, exhausted, resting a head against Theo's knee. Theo looked up. He found Tala watching him. Her golden eyes were not predatory, nor were they merely grateful. They were looking at him with a profound, terrifying recognition. She saw power in him. Not the power of claws or guns, but the power to impose order on chaos. The power to make things safe. Bran cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Great. You are a nursery rhyme expert. Now does anyone want to address the fact that we have 2 more mouths to feed and 0 water?" As if on cue, the lights in the corridor flickered red. Halden's voice boomed from the hidden speakers in the walls. "Touching. Truly, The warden's voice dripped with sarcasm. But I am afraid the hospitality period is over. As of this moment, I have remotely disabled the moisture evaporators in Sector 4, and 5, and 6. Theo stood up, his face hardening. The aquifers are sealed, Halden continued. However, I have a supply drop waiting at the canyon entrance. 500 gallons of purified water. All you have to do is turn around, bring the wolf, leave the rest. The offer stands for 1 hour. It was the squeeze. The classic pressure tactic. Dehydration killed faster than hunger. With the children, their water consumption would double. Halden was forcing them to choose between dying of thirst together or surviving apart. Theo looked at the children. Pax was licking his dry lips. We are not going back, Theo said. Then we die of thirst in 2 days, Bran pointed out. Halden controls the taps. He controls the taps, Theo said, his mind racing, pulling up schematics of planetary infrastructure he had memorized years ago. But he controls them from somewhere. The signal has to come from a local hub. He turned to Bran. You said you hacked his feed earlier. Where's the signal origin? Bran blinked. The Northridge Relay Station. It is a fortress heart. Automated turrets, perimeter fields. Does it have a weather grid? Theo asked. Yes, but if it has a weather grid, it has storm maps, Theo said. And if we have storm maps, we do not need his water. We can track the microsqualls and harvest rain directly from the ecotide fronts. Theo grabbed his pry bar. We are not begging for water. We are going to steal the weather report. You want to raid a fortress, Bran said, looking at Theo like he had grown a second head. With a pry bar and a wolf. And you, Theo said. You are the demolition expert. Bran stared at him. Then, a slow, crooked grin spread across his scarred face. I want to see you die hard. I really do. It is going to be spectacular. The relay station sat on a crag of black rock, bristling with antennas and sensor arrays. It looked like a giant metallic insect clinging to the mountainside. They left Cleo in a secure alcove half a mile back with the children. It was a risk, but taking the kids into a firefight was madness. The infiltration went surprisingly well at first. Bran shorted the perimeter fence with a localized EMP charge, made from a scavenged drone battery. Tala scaled the outer wall like a shadow, disabling the sentry turrets before they could acquire a lock. Theo cracked the main airlock using a manual override sequence that involved crossing 2 wires and hitting the control panel in a very specific spot with his boot. Sophisticated, Bran commented. Percussive maintenance, Theo corrected. They reached the central control room. Rows of monitors displayed the misery of Meyerhaven feeds of other contestants, dying thermal maps and water flow controls. Theo jumped onto the main console. Cover the door. I need 3 minutes to download the storm patterns. He plugged his datapad into the terminal. His fingers flew across the holographic interface. He was in his element now. Code, logic, systems. Accessing meteorological database, Theo muttered. Come on, give me the squall lines. Suddenly, a hiss of gas erupted from the vents in the ceiling. Gas, Bran shouted, covering his face with his arm. It wasn't poison. It smelled sweet cloying like rotting flowers. Rage gas, Theo realized with horror. Halden is watching. He looked at Tala. She was standing by the door. As the gas hit her, her body went rigid. The pheromones bypassed higher brain function and slammed directly into the amygdala. Tala roared. It was not a word this time. It was pure violence. Her eyes turned black. Her claws extended to their full length, gouging deep grooves into the metal floor. She spun around, looking at Bran. To her drugged mind, he was not a pack member. He was a threat. Tala, no! Theo shouted, abandoning the console. She lunged. Bran rolled, barely dodging a swipe that would have decapitated him. He raised his rifle, his face pale. Hart, call her off, or I put her down. Do not shoot! Theo scrambled over the console, jumping between them. Tala turned on Theo. She did not recognize him. The gas was stronger here than in the open air. She raised a hand ready to strike. Theo braced himself. He had no weapon. He had no time to count breaths. Suddenly, a small gray blur shot into the room from the ventilation shaft. It was Pax. The boy had followed them. He had squeezed through the ducts where the adults couldn't fit. Pax didn't attack. He ran straight to Tala and wrapped his small arms around her massive furred leg. He buried his face in her flank and let out a high, piercing whistle, a distress call of their species. Tala froze. The claw hung in the air above Theo's head. The whistle cut through the chemical haze. It was a sound hardwired into her biology. Protect the young. She looked down. She saw the cub. She felt his trembling against her leg. The blackness in her eyes receded, replaced by gold. She shook her head, violently, snarling at the air fighting the gas. She reached down and placed a hand on Pax's head, grounding herself. "Family!" She growled the word clearer this time. She looked at Theo, shame burning in her eyes. "Grab the data!" Theo yelled, his voice cracking. "We are leaving." He ripped the data pad from the console. "Bran, blow the door." Bran planted a charge on the exit seal. "Fire in the hole!" The blast blew the door off its hinges. They sprinted out into the cold night air, the wind whipping away the last of the rage gas. They regrouped at a safe distance, huddled under an overhang of rock. The adrenaline crash hit them all at once. Theo sat against the wall, his hands shaking as he checked the datapad. "We got it. Storm front moving in from the east. High precipitation. We can fill every canteen we have in 2 hours." He looked up. Tala was sitting a few feet away, grooming Pax, checking him for injuries. She looked up and caught Theo's eye. She moved over to him. She did not speak. She reached out and touched his cheek with the back of her hand. Her claws were retracted. The touch was tentative, asking a question. "Are you okay? Did I hurt you?" Theo leaned into the touch just slightly. The distance between them vanished. In the dirt, blood, and cold of a Deathworld, she was the only warm thing that made sense. He looked at her lips. She looked at him. The biological differences, the fur, the teeth, didn't matter. What mattered was the anchor. He leaned in. She leaned in. "Are you two fixing the machine?" The voice was small and innocent. Theo and Tala jumped apart. Lumen was standing there, blinking big bioluminescent eyes, holding a canteen. "The machine," Lumen repeated, pointing to Theo's chest. "Is it broken again?" Theo let out a long, ragged sigh. He rubbed his face, hiding the flush of embarrassment. "Yes," Theo said, his voice dry. "It is the emotional machine. It is a very unreliable model. It breaks constantly." Tala made that chuffing sound a laugh. She nudged Theo with her shoulder, then went to help Lumen with the canteen. Bran watched from the side, cleaning his rifle. He shook his head, but there was a smirk on his face. "Unbelievable. You are courting a wolf. My mother warned me about engineers." Later, as the storm Theo had predicted began to lash rain against the rocks, they huddled around a small heat lamp Cleo had rigged. Theo was analyzing the rest of the data he had stolen. It wasn't just weather maps. It was data on the spire itself. "This is..." Theo frowned, scrolling through the text. "This is why Halden said we need a partner. The spire's gate mechanism is based on harmonic resonance. It requires 2 distinct biological signatures attempting to synchronize." "A duet," Cleo noted. "More than that," Theo said. "It requires a binding vow. The translation is rough, but it looks like a neurological commitment. The spire scans for intent. If the bond isn't permanent, if it's just a temporary alliance for survival, the door stays shut." "It wants a marriage," Bran deadpanned. "Great. So we need a priest, Joan," Theo said. "It needs a promise that overrides self-preservation." Silence fell over the group. A survival alliance was one thing. A bond that overrode the instinct to live. That was rare. Tala stood up. She walked to the center of the circle. She looked at the children sleeping soundly now that they had water. She looked at Cleo bandaging her foot. She looked at Bran, who was keeping watch. Then she looked at Theo. She reached into her pouch and pulled out a small, sharp piece of obsidian. She walked over to Theo and knelt before him. She held out the stone handle first. Then she bared her throat. Bran tensed. "What is she doing? It is the vow of the Fang," Theo whispered, remembering the cultural files he had read on the pod. "She is offering me the kill. By refusing it, I accept the protection." It was a proposal. Not of romance exactly, though that was there. It was a proposal of shared fate. My life is yours. Your life is mine. Tala looked at him. Her eyes were pleading. She wasn't doing this just to open the door. She was doing it because she knew with absolute certainty that Theo would not leave Pax and Lumen behind. She was betting her life on his character. Theo looked at the knife. He looked at the woman who could snap him in half but chose to let him count her breaths. He reached out. He took the stone from her hand. He didn't cut her. He turned the stone and drove it into the ground between them, burying the blade in the dirt. He looked at her. "I accept." Tala let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. "Pack," she whispered. "Pack," Theo replied. The spire looming high above them in the storm pulsed once. A deep, resonant violet thrum that shook the ground. It had heard them. The engagement was official. Now they just had to survive the wedding day. The interior of the Echo Spire did not look like a machine. It looked like the inside of a living, breathing lung made of obsidian and starlight. The corridor they had unlocked opened into a vast, cavernous atrium that defied architectural logic. The walls curved upward into a ceiling so high it was lost in a haze of violet mist. There were no rivets, no panels, no seams. The entire structure seemed to have been grown from a single seed of black glass, but it was the light that stopped them in their tracks. Running through the translucent walls were millions of filaments glowing with a soft, pulsing luminescence. They looked like nerve endings or perhaps strings on a cosmic instrument, and they were loud, not with sound but with presence. Theo Hart stepped onto the central platform, a circular dais suspended over a drop that seemed to go down to the planetary core. As his boot touched the surface, the floor rippled like water. A wave of violet light shot out from his footprint, racing up the walls and causing the filaments to hum. Thump, thump. The hum matched his heart rate perfectly. "It is watching us," Dr. Cleo Rook whispered, her voice trembling. She was clutching Lumen's hands so tightly her knuckles were white. "It is scanning our autonomic nervous systems. It is not a door, Theo. It is a diagnostic tool." "It is a church," Brancade corrected, looking around with a mix of cynicism and awe. He adjusted the strap of his modified rifle. "A church built by something that eats physics for breakfast. Where is the console if I cannot plug something in, I cannot hack it?" "There," Theo pointed to a protrusion of crystal, near the far edge of the platform. It looked less like a computer terminal and more like an altar. "That is the interface node. Bran, get the data core connected. We need to feed it the harmonic sequence we stole." Bran sprinted toward the node. "On it. If I turn into a pile of ash, tell my ex-wife she was right about my career choices." Theo turned to the doctor. "Keep the kids centered. Their fear will create dissonance. The spire needs a clean signal. Keep them calm. Count breaths if you have to." Cleo nodded her face, pale but set with determination. She pulled Pax and Lumen into a small alcove, formed by two rising pillars of glass. "All right, children. We are going to conduct a field study on bioluminescent acoustics. Stay close." Theo turned to Tala. The wolf woman was standing perfectly still in the center of the dais. Her golden eyes were wide, reflecting the galaxy of lights around them. Her ears were swiveled back, twitching, at sounds Theo could not hear. The sheer volume of resonance in this place must have been deafening to her, yet she wasn't shaking. She was grounded. She looked at Theo. She tapped the det cord on his wrist, then pointed to the floor beneath their feet. Anchor. Right, Theo exhaled, stepping next to her. We are the anchors. We just have to exist. Loudly, Bran shouted from the console. I am in, or I think I am in. The code is rewriting itself as I type. It is like trying to argue with a poet using binary, but the sequence is loading. 90 seconds to harmonic lock. 90 seconds, Theo muttered. We can do 90 seconds. The air pressure in the room dropped suddenly. The violet lights flickered, turning a sickly shade of bruised crimson. From the shadows on the far side of the atrium, shadows that should not have been there, in a room made of light, a figure stepped out. He was not a hologram this time. He was flesh and blood. He wore a pristine, high-collared suit that looked absurdly out of place in a Deathworld ruin. He walked with a slight limp, leaning on a cane made of the same silver metal as the hunter drones. Warden Halden. 90 seconds is a long time, Theo, Halden said. His voice did not echo. The spire seemed to absorb his words, dampening them, as if the building itself disliked him. Theo stiffened. Tala let out a low, rumbling growl, stepping in front of Theo, her claws sliding out with a metallic shing. Halden, Theo said. You look tired. The high definition feeds you favors. Halden stopped 10 feet away. Up close, the smooth perfection of his face looked brittle. There were lines of exhaustion etched deep around his eyes, and his hand gripped the cane with a tension that betrayed a tremor. Management is stressful, Halden said, offering a thin, tight smile. Especially when the guests insist on breaking the furniture. He looked up at the ceiling where the storm outside was beginning to hammer against the spire's hull. The echo tide was starting. The walls vibrated with the impact of reality-distorting waves. The tide is here, Halden said, his voice dropping to a reasonable, almost pleading tone. Listen to the walls, Theo. The pressure is critical. If the spire does not open in 3 minutes, the resonance backlash will liquefy everything within a 5-mile radius, including us. Then let us open the door, Theo said. Bran is working on it. Unless you are here to help, step aside. Halden shook his head slowly. The harmonic sequence you stole is flawed. It assumes a perfect chorus. But look at your choir. He gestured to the group. A scavenger, a discredited doctor, 2 traumatized orphans, a feral beast, and a mechanic with a hero complex. It is too much noise. The spire will reject the signal. It will see it as chaos and purge the room. Halden took a step closer, ignoring Tala's snarl. He held out a hand. I have a sovereignty key, Halden said. A master override. I can force the gate to accept a simplified signal, but it has a bandwidth limit. 2 signatures. That is it. The offer hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. You and the wolf, Halden said softly. You are the strongest signals. You are the bond. Let the others go. Leave them here. The spire will purge the dissonance them, and the door will open for you. You live. You win the game. You get the girl. It was the logic of the survival guide. In a depressurized compartment, seal the leak. If the leak is a person, seal the person. Theo looked at Halden. He looked at Bran, sweating over the console. He looked at Cleo, singing a soft lullaby to Pax and Lumen. He looked at Tala, who was ready to rip Halden's throat out, but was waiting for Theo's command. Theo let out a short, dry laugh. It sounded like sandpaper rubbing together. You know Halden, Theo said. You remind me of a travel agent I once knew. He tried to sell me a vacation to a volcano. I am offering you life, Halden snapped, his patience fraying. Do not be a martyr. It is messy, and it doesn't pay well. You are selling a one-way ticket, Theo, said, his voice hardening into steel. But you are asking me to check my luggage. And the problem is, my luggage is people. I do not check people. Halden's face went cold. The veneer of politeness vanished, revealed the predator beneath. Kindness is too slow, Theo. The echo tide does not wait for you to feel good about yourself. Then we make it wait, Theo said. Halden sighed. He looked genuinely regretful, like a man forced to put down a lame horse. I tried, I really did. But if you will not streamline the signal, I will have to scrub the noise myself. He raised his cane and struck the obsidian floor. Clack! The sound was a trigger. The shadows around the perimeter of the room uncoiled. They were not shadows. They were skulkers, dozens of them, their heat-dampening cloaks deactivating in unison. Red optical sensors flared to life in the gloom. Clear the room, Halden ordered. Leave the wolf alive. Kill the rest. The battle for the spire began not with a gunshot, but with a song. As the skulkers lunged, the spire reacted to the spike in aggression. The violet filaments in the walls flared blindingly bright. A low, resonant tone erupted from the architecture itself, a sound so deep it vibrated in the marrow of their bones. Ah! It wasn't just noise, it was memory. The echo tide was a distortion of time and reality, and the spire was its lightning rod. As the sound hit Theo, the room spun. The skulkers froze in mid-air, caught in a stasis field of thick time. Theo fell to his knees, clutching his head. Suddenly he wasn't on Meyerhaven. He was standing on the bridge of a massive starship. The air smelled of sterile ozone and expensive cologne. He looked down at his hands. They were not calloused and stained with grease. They were manicured. He was wearing a suit identical to Halden's. A display screen in front of him showed a planet burning. A comms officer looked at him with tears in her eyes. Sir, the evacuation transports are too slow. If we wait for them, the blockade will catch us. We have to jump now. Theo heard his own voice answer. It was cold, precise, and terrifyingly familiar. The math is clear, Lieutenant. Jump. The loss of the transports is within acceptable margins. He felt the ship jump. He felt the souls of 5,000 people vanish behind him. And he felt nothing. He felt the relief of survival. He felt the satisfaction of the optimal choice. The vision shifted. He saw himself sitting alone in a room full of trophies, drinking amber liquid, staring at a wall of screens. He was old. He was safe. And he was hollowed out, a husk of a man who had sold every piece of his soul to buy another day of breath. This is you, the spire sang to him. This is the path of the survivor. This is the end point of efficiency. No, Theo gasped, clawing at the floor of the bridge spire. No, I did not, I would not. But the vision pressed down on him. It felt more real than the stone under his knees. It felt inevitable. The logic was so seductive. Why die for the weak? Why lose everything for a gesture? Let them go. Take the deal. Become the warden. A hand grabbed his vest. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a rough, desperate yank that pulled him sideways. Theo gasped, the air rushing back into his lungs. The vision shattered like glass. The starship bridge dissolved into the violet mist of the spire. Tala was crouching over him. She had abandoned her defensive stance to grab him. Her eyes were wild, blazing with gold fire. She was roaring something, but the sound was lost in the chaos. She slammed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. Thump! She snarled, baring her fangs at his face. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. Stay here. Stay with me. Do not go where the ghosts are. Tala! Theo choked out. She grabbed his face between her paws, her claws retracted, but pressing hard into his skin. She grounded him in the pain, in the pressure, in the smell of wet fur and ozone. Do not let the storm right you, her eyes said. You right the storm. Theo blinked, the last shreds of the cold future self fading away. He looked at Halden, across the room. Halden was watching him with a strange expression, not triumph, but a terrible, knowing sadness. "Snap out of it, Hart." Brand's voice cut through the din. Time snapped back into motion. The skulkers landed. "Defensive formation!" Theo yelled, scrambling to his feet. "Use the pillars." The floor, it shifts with sound. A skulker leaped at Cleo. She didn't scream. She threw a handful of metallic dust, scavenged from the parasites, into the air, and shouted, "High C!" She pulled a sonic emitter from her belt, something she must have cobbled together with Bran, and triggered a high-frequency pulse. The spire amplified it. The floor beneath the skulker liquefied, instantly turning into a pool of vibrating sound. The machine sank halfway into the stone before the floor solidified again, trapping it in the obsidian. "Physics!" Cleo yelled triumphantly. "It works even when reality is broken." Bran was firing wildly from the console, picking off the drones that tried to flank them. "I am at 98%. The firewall is literally eating my algorithm. I need time." 3 skulkers bypassed Tala and rushed the altar. They ignored the wolf. Their target was the hacker. Bran saw them coming. He looked at the progress bar, 99%. He looked at the exit path to his right, a clear run to a higher ledge where he could take cover. Then he looked at Cleo, who was reloading her sonic emitter, unaware that a 4th skulker was dropping from the ceiling behind her. "Oh, for the love of—" Bran snarled. He abandoned the console. He abandoned the safe route. He leaped over the railing, tackling Cleo to the ground, just as the skulker's razor legs slammed into the spot where she had been standing. Bran rolled, coming up with his rifle jammed under the skulker's chassis. He pulled the trigger. The explosion blew the drone apart and sent Bran flying backward into a pillar. He hit hard, sliding down to the floor, wheezing. "Bran!" Theo shouted. "I am fine." Bran coughed, spitting blood. "I just hate subtraction. I prefer addition." He had saved her. The cynic who wanted to leave her in the valley had just used his body as a shield. Tala roared a sound of pure triumph. The pack was holding. She spun, moving like a dark whirlwind. She didn't just fight. She danced. She used the weird gravity of the spire running up the walls, pushing off the filaments of light. She tore the head off a skulker, threw it at another, and landed in front of Theo. "The resonance!" Theo yelled to her. "We have to finish the lock. Bran's code is stuck at 99. We have to push it over the edge." "How?" Cleo shouted, shielding the children. "The vow." Theo looked at Tala. "The spire needs the commitment. It needs the illogical variable." They stood in the center of the dais. Bullets and laser fire zipped past them, absorbed by the humming shields of the altar. The noise was deafening, screaming metal, roaring ecotide, shouting voices. It was the worst possible wedding venue in the universe. Theo grabbed Tala's hands. They were covered in drone oil and blood. "Tala," Theo shouted over the noise, "I promise not to die." Tala looked at him. She understood. "I promise to fix what breaks," Theo yelled. "I promise that your pack is my pack. I promise that if we survive this, I will buy you a steak the size of a door." It wasn't poetry. It was a mess. Tala threw her head back and howled. It was the vow of the Fang translated into sound. It was a promise to hunt together, to bleed, together to share the warmth of the kill and the cold of the night. She looked down at him and spoke one word in English, a word she had been practicing. "Stay." The spire heard them. The violet light turned blinding white. The hum escalated into a choir of millions of voices singing a single perfect chord. The interface node on the console flashed harmonic sync, 100%. The massive obsidian gates at the far end of the atrium groaned. They began to split apart, revealing a swirling vortex of white energy beyond the eye of the storm, the safety of the sanctuary. "It is opening!" Cleo screamed. "Go move the children!" Bran limped toward the kids, scooping Lumen up in one arm, while Cleo grabbed Pax. Everybody on the bus. The wheels are falling off, but we are moving. They ran toward the gate. Theo and Tala held the rear, walking backward, keeping their eyes on Halden. Halden had not moved. He stood amidst the wreckage of his drones, leaning on his cane. He watched the gate open with a look of mild annoyance. "You are stubborn," Halden said, his voice amplified by the room. "I admire that, but you forgot who owns the building." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming device. It looked like a shard of the spire itself, glowing with a dark, inverted light. "The sovereignty key," Halden said. "I did not just find this place, Theo. I bound myself to it. I am the admin." He crushed the shard in his hand. Clang. The massive gates slammed shut. They didn't close all the way. They jammed, leaving a gap of only a few inches. The white light of safety spilled out, taunting them, but the way was barred. The floor of the spire shuddered violently. The lights turned a chaotic flashing red. "System error," Bran groaned. "He crashed the server." "He didn't crash it," Theo realized, looking at Halden. "He is the firewall. He is blocking the signal physically." Halden began to walk toward them. As he walked, the spire seemed to bend around him. The floor tiles rearranged themselves to form steps for him. The filaments of light darkened as he passed. He wasn't just a man with a remote control. He was connected to the architecture. The veins in his neck were glowing with the same violet light as the walls. "I told you," Halden said, his voice sounding like grinding stones now. "The echo tide requires order. I am the order." "He is part of the door," Tala growled, sensing the wrongness of his scent. "He smells like stone." Outside, the storm reached its peak. The echo tide broke through the outer shielding of the spire. The ceiling of the atrium dissolved. It didn't break. It just ceased to be solid. The sky poured in, not a sky of clouds, but a sky of fractured time. One moment it was day. The next, it was star-filled night. Then it was a sepia-toned afternoon from 100 years ago. Rain fell upward. Lightning struck in slow motion, branching out like tree roots and staying frozen in the air. The light in the spire shifted to the color of a broken dawn, a bruised mix of gold and gray, beautiful and terrifying. Time around them began to soften. Theo looked at his hand. For a second it looked old and withered, then young and smooth and normal again. "The tide is in," Halden said, stopping 10 yards from them. He dropped his cane. He didn't need it anymore. He floated an inch off the ground, suspended by the warped gravity. "Last chance, Theo. The door is jammed." "Door is aha. I can squeeze 2 people through the gap before the reality wave wipes the rest. Choose." Theo looked at the gap in the door. It was small, just enough for 2. He looked at his family. Bran bleeding against a pillar. Cleo shielding the terrified children. Tala standing ready to fight a god. He looked at Halden, and for the first time he saw not a monster, but a warning. He saw exactly what happened when you chose the optimal path every single time. You became efficient. You became powerful. And you became entirely, absolutely alone. Theo drew his pry bar. It was a laughable weapon against a reality bender, but he held it like Excalibur. "I am adding a new rule to the list," Theo said, his voice cutting through the time storm. "Rule number 11, if the door is locked." Theo grinned, a sharp, dangerous expression that matched Tala's. "Remove the wall." He turned to Tala. "Fastball special." Tala didn't know the term, but she knew the intent. She crouched low, weaving her fingers together to form a cup. "Pack!" she snarled. Theo ran. He hit her hands and she launched him. Not at the door, not at the exit. She launched him straight at Halden. As Theo flew through the air, the broken dawn light catching the pry bar, he screamed a battle cry that was entirely undignified and absolutely perfect. The echo tide roared, and the world dissolved into light. The impact was not flesh against flesh, nor metal against shield. It was the collision of two timelines crashing into one another. Theo Hart's pry bar connected with the energy field surrounding Warden Halden. The force of the blow, propelled by Tala's inhuman strength and Theo's desperate momentum, shattered the localized gravity around the Warden. The air screamed a high tearing sound, like a jet engine inhaling a flock of birds. Theo hit the ground hard, rolling across the obsidian floor, which rippled like water under his weight. He tasted blood and ozone. Above them, the echo tide breached the final containment of the spire. The roof did not collapse. It evaporated into pure history. The sky was a swirling vortex of sepia and neon. Rain fell in slow motion, each drop containing a moving image of a memory, a child crying, a ship launching, a wolf howling at a broken moon. The laws of physics had filed for bankruptcy and left the building. "Get up!" Brancade screamed, firing his rifle at a cluster of skulkers that were trying to reform from the time soup. "The logic is breaking down. My gun just tried to recite poetry." Theo scrambled to his feet. Halden was down. The Warden had been thrown back against the central interface core. The impact had cracked his pristine suit, and the violet light of the spire was bleeding out of the console, arcing into his body. Halden groaned, trying to stand. The sovereignty key, the device he had used to control the spire, lay shattered on the floor. "It is over, Halden," Theo shouted, raising the bent pry bar. "Open the gate!" Halden laughed. It was a wet, rattling sound. He slumped against the black glass of the core, his legs refusing to support him. He reached up with a trembling hand and clawed at his neck. "The mask," Halden wheezed. "It itches." He pulled. There was a hiss of pressurized sealants releasing. A thin, transparent layer of biosynthetic polymer peeled away from his face, a high-tech disguise used to smooth wrinkles and alter bone structure slightly. The mask fell to the floor. Theo froze. The pry bar slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the stone. The face, looking back at him, was old. The skin was weathered by decades of hard sun and harder choices. The hair was white, thinned by stress. But the eyes were the same hazel green that Theo saw in the mirror every morning. And there, running from the left temple, down to the jawline, was a jagged, silvery scar. Theo reached up instinctively to touch his own face. Just 2 days ago, a piece of shrapnel from a hunter drone had grazed him, in that exact spot. Dr. Cleo Rook had stitched it up with biothread, leaving an angry red line that would in time turn into that exact silver scar. "No," Theo whispered. The word felt like a stone in his throat. "No, that is not possible." "Possibility," Halden rasped, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the pristine floor. "Is just a variable of time, Theo, and we have had so much time." Tala stepped forward, placing herself between Theo and the man on the floor. She growled a deep, confused rumble. She smelled the blood. She smelled the sweat. And to her enhanced senses, the scent was identical. One was fresh. One was aged like wine turned to vinegar. But they were the same man. "Who are you?" Bran shouted, limping closer, his weapon lowered in confusion. "I am the survivor," Halden said. He looked at Theo with an expression of profound, heartbreaking exhaustion. "I am the one who made the optimal choice." The reality wave pulsed. For a second, Theo saw a ghostly overlay on the room. He saw this same room, but darker. He saw himself younger, terrified, standing where he was now. He saw Tala dead on the floor. He saw Pax and Lumen motionless. He saw Bran and Cleo gone. "The first time," Halden said, his voice gaining strength as the spire fed him energy, "I was kind. I was slow. I tried to save everyone by negotiating. I tried to hack the door without the vow. I tried to be the hero who kept his hands clean." Halden looked at Tala, and his eyes filled with tears that looked like molten glass. "The echo tide hit," Halden whispered. "It took them all. It peeled the skin from their bones while I watched. The spire rejected the signal because the bond was weak. It was just a partnership. It wasn't absolute. Theo shook his head, backing away. So you what? You went back. The spire threw me back, Halden corrected. It is a machine of memory. It preserved the one thing that survived, me. It spat me out 30 years in the past on the other side of the planet, alone, with nothing but the memory of them screaming. So, you became the warden, Cleo realized, her voice horrified. You built this game. I built a crucible, Halden snapped, sudden anger flaring. I knew the Ecotide would come again. I knew you would come again, and I knew that if you were soft, if you were hesitant, you would lose them again. Halden dragged himself up to a sitting position. He gestured at the chaos around them, the fighting, the desperation, the bond that Theo and Tala had forged in blood. Kindness is too slow, Halden yelled, his voice cracking. Love takes years to build. I did not have years. I had 3 days. I had to make you hated. I had to make you desperate. I had to force you into a corner so tight that the only way out was to fuse your soul with theirs. He pointed a shaking finger at Theo. I became the monster so you would have something to fight. I pushed you to the edge so you would grab her hand and never let go. And look at the readings. Halden slammed his fist against the console behind him. A holographic display flared to life. Harmonic resonance, 100%. You hate me, Halden said, tears streaming down his scarred face. You hate me so much that you bonded with a wolf, adopted 2 orphans, and fought a small war just to spite me. And because of that, the door is open. Silence descended on the atrium. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. Theo stood there, trembling. He felt sick. He felt violated. The struggle, the pain, the top 10 list, it had all been engineered. He was a rat in a maze designed by his own future ghost. You used us, Theo said, his voice barely a whisper. You used them. You killed people, Halden. The other contestants. Acceptable losses, Halden recited the line from the vision. To save the family, that is the math, isn't it, Theo? The optimal choice. I am not you, Theo said. You are me, Halden shouted. We are the same. We solve problems. I solved the problem of their death. I sacrificed my soul to ensure they breathed. That is what fathers do. That is what leaders do. Halden slumped back, his energy fading. I saved them. I won. Theo looked at Tala. She was watching Halden. Her ears were flat against her skull. She understood. In her simple, brutal, honest worldview, she understood the logic of the alpha who bites the pup to teach it to avoid the snake. But she also understood the smell of rot. Theo looked at Halden, at the lonely, bitter, powerful man he was destined to become. A man who had won by losing everything that made the victory worth having. No, Theo said firmly. You did not win. You just delayed the loss. Theo stepped forward. He didn't pick up the weapon. He walked until he was standing over his older self. You forced the bond, Theo said. But you broke the person. If I become you, I lose Tala anyway. Because Tala does not love men who treat people like variables in an equation. Theo looked back at the wolf woman. Right, Tala looked at Theo. Then she looked at Halden. She stepped forward. The giant predator, who had ripped drones apart with her bare hands, approached the broken old man. Halden flinched. He expected the kill. He deserved the kill. It would be the final mercy, the closing of the loop. Tala did not strike. She reached out with a hand covered in dark fur. She placed her palm gently on Halden's forehead, right over the scar that marked their shared history. She let out a soft, low whine. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was the sound a mother makes when a cub is sick. It was a sound of pity. You are hurt. You are alone. You are broken. She forgave him, not because he was right, but because he was Theo, and she had vowed to protect Theo in all his forms. Halden froze. The touch seemed to burn him more than the energy bolts. His eyes widened. He looked up at the creature he had spent 30 years trying to manipulate, and for the first time he saw her, not as an objective, but as a person. She, Halden choked. She never did that in my time. Because in your time, Theo said softly, you didn't give her the choice. You tried to control the outcome. We let it happen. The spire began to sing. It was a new sound. It wasn't the violent hum of the echo tide, nor the forced resonance of the machine. It was a clear, bell-like tone that rose from the floor, passed through their bodies, and descended into the storm. The final chord. The spire was not just asking for biological synchronization. It was asking for a moral conclusion. It was waiting to see if the cycle of violence would repeat. If Theo had killed Halden, the resonance would have shattered. The door would have closed. But he didn't. Tala didn't. They chose grace. The door, Bran shouted, pointing. Look at the door. The massive gates which had been jammed began to glow with a blinding white light. The jam didn't break. The gates simply dissolved. They turned into mist, opening a path wide enough, not just for two, but for an army. The storm outside began to recede, pushed back by the sheer pressure of the peace radiating from the group. Go, Theo said to the others. Get to the transport. What about him? Cleo asked, looking at Halden. Theo looked down at his older self. Halden was fading. Not dying in the traditional sense, but dissolving. He was a paradox. He was a timeline that no longer had a cause. If Theo didn't lose, Tala Halden didn't exist. He cannot go, Theo said. He is the anchor. Halden looked at his hands. They were turning into motes of violet light. He looked up at Theo. The bitterness was gone. He looked peaceful. You made a better list, Halden whispered. I had a better co-author, Theo said, glancing at Tala. Halden smiled. It was the first genuine smile Theo had seen on that face. One piece of advice, kid, for the road. Yeah. Don't trust administrators with smooth voices, Halden said, his voice becoming hollow, like wind in a tunnel. Usually it means they are tired. I will make a note, Theo said. Top 10 list. Entry number 12. Don't become me, Halden said, his eyes locking onto Theo's one last time. Don't let the survival cost you the life. Halden closed his eyes. His body scattered into a million points of light, swirling up into the violet mist of the ceiling, joining the memory of the spire. He wasn't gone exactly. He was just archived. A ghost in the machine finally allowed to sleep. The floor beneath him began to tremble. The ecotide was ending, but the collapse of the paradox was destabilizing the spire. We have to move, Bran yelled. The reality bubble is popping. Theo grabbed Tala's hand. She grabbed Pax. Pax grabbed Lumen. Lumen grabbed Cleo. Cleo grabbed Bran. They were a chain. A living, breathing circuit of empathy. Run, Theo shouted. They sprinted toward the wall of white mist where the gate had been. The world behind them folded in on itself. The obsidian floor turned to liquid. The pillars twisted like taffy. They hit the white light together. There was a sensation of falling not down, but through time, through probability, through the cold, hard math of the universe, and out the other side into something warm. Epilogue. The conference room on Station Sigma 9 was sterile, cold, and smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant. It was the smell of civilization. 3 corporate adjudicators sat behind a long floating desk. They wore gray suits that cost more than Theo's old drop pod. They looked at the ragtag group standing before them with a mixture of confusion and bureaucratic disdain. Theo Hart stood in the center. He was wearing a fresh jumpsuit, but he still had the det cord tied around his wrist. Next to him stood Tala. She was wearing a modified flight jacket that stretched over her shoulders, looking uncomfortable but imposing. Behind them sat Brancade cleaning his nails with a combat knife, Dr. Cleo Rook filling out forms with aggressive speed, and two alien children who were currently drawing on the expensive carpet with markers. Mr. Hart, the lead adjudicator said, looking over his spectacles. "This is highly irregular. You were presumed dead. Your contract was terminated. And now you return with," he gestured vaguely at the group, "unauthorized biological assets." "Family," Theo corrected calmly. "The company does not recognize found family as a valid dependent category," the adjudicator said dryly. "Furthermore, you are in breach of your non-disclosure agreement. Regarding the Meyerhaven testing site, you claim the warden is dead." "Retired," Theo said. "Permanently." "And the facility's gone," Theo lied. "The spire collapsed. Total loss of assets," the adjudicator sighed. "This is a disaster, Mr. Hart. You have no salvage to show for the mission. You have no data. You have no profit. According to your contract, we can bill you for the drop pod." Theo reached into his pocket. He pulled out a battered scratch data pad. "I have this," Theo said. He slid the pad across the polished table. "What is this?" the adjudicator asked, picking it up gingerly. "It is a guide," Theo said. "Title, Top 10 Ways to Keep Your Soul When the Universe Wants to Eat You." The adjudicator scrolled through the file. He frowned. "This is not a technical manual. Rule 1, do not bleed. Rule 11, remove the wall. Rule 12, kindness is the only efficient engine. Mr. Hart, this is philosophy. We cannot sell this." "You can," Theo said, leaning forward. "And you will. Because if you don't, I will upload the raw footage of Warden Halden, your employee, forcing children into a death match. I imagine the shareholders would find that bad for ratings." The adjudicator paled. He looked at his colleagues. He looked at Tala, who smiled, revealing a terrifying amount of teeth. "We can discuss a settlement," the adjudicator stammered. "Excellent," Theo said. "I want a ship, a transport class, big enough for 6, and I want full citizenship papers for everyone behind me." "That is expensive," the adjudicator protested. "Put it on my tab," Theo said. "I am a best-selling author now, right?" 3 hours later, they were standing in the docking bay. The ship was ugly, boxy, and looked like a flying brick. To Theo, it was beautiful. Bran was already inside, arguing with the navigation computer. Cleo was scanning the galley for bacteria. Pax and Lumen were chasing each other through the cargo hold, their laughter echoing off the metal plates. Theo stood at the bottom of the ramp, looking out at the stars. Tala walked up beside him. She bumped her shoulder against his. "Home?" she asked. It was one of the 10 words she had mastered in English. Theo looked at her. He looked at the det cord on his wrist. He thought about the man he almost became, the lonely warden in the tower. He took her hand. Her palm was rough, warm and real. "No," Theo said, nodding toward the ship and the noisy, chaotic family inside. "That is the vehicle. This," he squeezed her hand. "This is home." He pulled out his marker one last time. On the hull of the new ship, right next to the airlock, he wrote a final addition to his list. Rule 13. The story does not end when you survive. It ends when you have someone to tell it to. Theo capped the marker. He tossed it to Pax, who caught it with a giggle. "Ready to fly, Captain?" Tala asked her, golden eyes twinkling. Theo Hart smiled a real smile, not a survival grimace. "Let's go," he said. "I hear there is a Deathworld in the Vega system that needs a 1-star review." The ramp closed. The engines fired, and the ship blasted off into the dark, carrying the most inefficient, illogical, and optimal crew in the galaxy.